Hallo, hinter mir findet gerade das zweite Bindungsfestival in Hude statt. Das liegt zwischen Bremen und Oldenburg. Ich habe hier den englischen Babytherapeuten Matthew Appleton getroffen und ich kann ihm gleich die Frage stellen, was macht eigentlich ein Babytherapeut und hat das irgendwas mit uns Erwachsenen zu tun? Hi there, I'm sitting here with Matthew Appleton. Matthew is a baby therapist working in Bristol, England, and I got the opportunity to ask him some crucial questions. And my first question would be, what on earth would a baby need therapy for?
Why wouldn't a baby need therapy?
Well, how can you tell that a baby would need therapy?
Well, when we think of therapy, we usually think of someone going to a therapist because they have a problem, and usually it's a problem they talk through with their therapist.
Yes.
So we think of somebody who has a story, they verbalize their story and they explore it with the therapist. What a lot of people don't understand is that babies have stories too.
Okay.
But babies can't tell us the story. They can't say, okay, this happened in my birth or this happened prenatally and I'd like to talk to you about it. But they do express what they're experiencing through their crying. So it may be part of their story that they're trying to express when they're crying. Now, this is something that most people don't understand.
Okay.
Most people think if a baby's crying, the baby needs feeding, the baby is maybe being overstimulated, is tired, and those are the general things.
Huh.
But babies cry for other reasons too. And one of these reasons is that they're still resonating with something left over from their birth experience or their prenatal experience, which they are trying to communicate.
Okay.
And yeah, most people would find that a very strange concept. And I think it's important for me to say this is not something that I came up with one day. It's not something one day I woke up, oh, you know.
Yeah.
I think babies
you channeled it somewhere.
I channeled it. I had a crystal in my hand and I was meditating on. No, it wasn't like this.
Okay.
This work is developed out of certainly more than 50 years of people initially working with adults and noticing there were certain body postures, spontaneous body postures, certain ways that people were connecting in with their birth experience through imagery and through, as I say, body postures that might be related to their birth or their prenatal experience.
Which implies that you do remember your birth or your prenatal experience, which many people doubt.
Well, the question of memory is a tricky one because most people think of what we call explicit memory, which is relating to, for example, Mark, what did you do this morning when you got up? How did you spend your morning? You could give me a narrative on that based on your explicit memory.
Yeah.
But we also have implicit memories, which are held in different parts of our nervous system, and also we talk about cellular memory or body memory as well. And there is more and more evidence, scientific evidence, to show that even cells hold memories. And this is something which we may resonate with at certain times, implicit memories.
Okay.
So, for example, there may be something from your school days which you're not remembering as a specific scene, but you walk into a situation where maybe somebody reminds you of a teacher you didn't like, and you have an implicit memory, you have a body response to that. You might get flooded by stress hormones, you might notice your body contracts in a particular way, your breathing becomes shallow, but you think, well, why am I feeling like this? You don't make the explicit connection between what's happening now and the memory of the teacher.
I see.
Now this is the same for babies. I mean, babies are human beings. They have experience, and they have a huge amount of experience. In fact, I would say that our most formative experiences happen prenatally, just after birth or within the first year of life.
Okay.
But these are held as implicit memories. They're like inner feeling states, which later on we develop beliefs around.
Okay. Can I go back to the question of you were mentioning the concept of memory crying?
Yes.
And how do you discern a memory crying from the crying all the parents know, which is the present moment needs crying?
Right. Well, one of the things, of course, is the babies don't say, "Hey, Mom, hi, Dad, I'd like to go and see a therapist." It's the parents that think, "Actually, I need some support. I need some help." It's like this is a doll we use to represent the baby.
Yeah.
So my baby is crying. I'm doing all those things that I've been told. I've read all those books saying how I should respond to my baby. I've had lots of advice from friends, from relatives. Nothing's working. Nothing's working. So I start to feel, wow, I must be a really bad parent. And I feel powerless, I feel distressed, and I can see my baby's distressed.
Yeah.
So here we have a crisis.
Yeah.
People seek therapy in crisis. So very often parents come with their babies to see, it may be a craniosacraltherapist, a cranial osteopath, for example. In fact, my initial background was in craniosacral therapy, so people were coming for body work with their babies. But one of the things that we are now aware of is what we call the memory crying, which is the first thing is that all the usual things that I try, all the try to feed, I try to soothe, none of these work, or they may work for a little while, but then the baby's suddenly distressed, angry, seems very frightened, maybe also is not sleeping well. But as we start to pay attention to the baby, we notice that the baby is perhaps touching a particular part of their cranium like this. So they're touching the same spot again.
Could you show it to the camera?
Again. Yeah. Again and again and again.
Okay.
And we might notice that the head's a little bit compressed on that side as well, for example. Maybe the eyes are a little bit closer to the nose, that the whole side of the face here is not as rounded as the other side.
Well, none of our faces are they?
No, but one of the major reasons for this is because this represents the bones of the maternal pelvis, is that our heads get compressed, particularly against one side of the pelvis.
Yeah.
This is called the lumbosacral promontory. It's a big massive bone here.
Yeah.
During birth, we get pushed over this, and then as we rotate, this is just one way we may be born. There are a number of different positions, but this is the most common one, is as I move through, or any of us move through the pelvis like this, you can see how one side gets more compressed.
Yeah.
And so the babies still feel the compressions there, particularly from the places where they got overwhelmed in the birth. And so the baby's touching this particular area. We call this a conjunct site. It's a place where the head was in conjunction with the bone. With the bone, like that. And we also talk about conjunct pathways, which is where the baby's head and face get pushed over the bones like this.
Okay.
So the baby may still be feeling that as an implicit memory, and so it's not a present moment cry, moment needs cry, which we call the normal cries. This is something where the baby has an implicit memory. They're touching this site because they're still feeling something here, and they are expressing usually something like anger, sadness, or anxiety.
So I guess it's an important point that this is accompanied by an strong emotional reaction.
This is really important, that this is not just about mechanical compression.
I see.
And this is where I really got deeply involved in the work, because originally I was just working with compressive forces and how the body was holding that. But the body holds it like a story. I often think of it a bit like a CD.
Yeah.
So, a CD has music imprinted into it, and you put the laser touches the CD and you start to play the music. It's a bit like the body holds on the memory like that, so we still feel it. And it may be particular things stimulate the birth as well. So for example, very common with small children is when parents pull clothes over their heads like this, they start to get very upset.
That's what many parents know, this reaction.
And this is because it's very often simulating the cervix. The baby's head, as the baby is born, the cervix stretches and passes over the baby's head. And there may be particular areas, such as these conjunct sites, that get particularly stimulated because the story is still there as an aspect of the baby's experience that has not been fully integrated.
Okay. And how would you help a baby to integrate this kind of story?
Well, we work in a number of different ways. So what I'm going to describe now is just a general kind of overview. But so here we have our baby. The baby's touching the conjunct site. Let's say this baby's really angry, really screaming, and maybe mom's panicking and dad's not sure what to do. And so we first of all we get interested in maybe your baby has a story to tell here. And one of the things we find with babies is if you start to really engage with them and ask, well, I wonder what you've got to show me, is they will...
So you actually talk to the baby?
We may talk to the baby, but it's actually about the intention. I mean, I work with babies here in Germany. I don't speak very good German. I work with babies in Italy, all over Europe. But the same principle is that we are holding an intention, so it's not the literal words that the baby is responding to, but it's more the intention. And babies are very sensitive to that. And let's say the baby's touching their head there, I may mirror that back. Oh, it's like, oh, I can see, that's hurting. I might also just move my hands around a little bit to see how the baby responds. Very often babies start to explore that by moving into the contact. And babies will sometimes actually move into the positions they got stuck in at birth. It's like something they really want to complete. It's like an unfinished story. They haven't integrated it. So I may, as I say, be exploring it with my hands. I may be mirroring that back, and I can see you look so angry in this particular case. Now, what happens is the babies, if you're getting this right with the babies, they are like so locked into you. They're really like, they look really deep. So, okay, you get this. Okay. And we always try to include the parents, to get them curious about maybe your baby has a story to tell. And very often, particularly with mums, they'll spontaneously get, this really reminds me of this stage of the birth. They might say this was happening in the birth, and they start to get interested and really get it. Now, what will often happen is the baby will move deeper into their birth story, and as I say, they might start to move into the position they got stuck in the birth. We might give them some support to move through that. And we might need to do that a number of times where it's literally they are moving through their birth, but they're moving through it with empathic connection to another human being.
With you and maybe with the parents which are present.
Yes, I mean, in a way I see my job as being like a bridge between the baby and the parents. But the first thing is to get the parents to be aware this baby is telling a story. Okay. Now this is something a lot of people might find fantastic. It's like, this sounds like nonsense. Sounds fantastic and sounds great at the same time. Well, the thing is that there's a very strong paradigm that babies don't have experience, and so they're very objectified. You mean paradigm in our culture? In our culture, yeah. It's something which there's every bit of evidence, every bit of research that's come out in the last 20, 30 years has really shown that babies are far more alert, sensitive and aware than we thought they were. So you're saying this is not just some esoteric bullshit, but there's a scientific grounding to it? This has a huge amount of scientific grounding to it. It has a huge amount of clinical evidence to support it as well from many different traditions. And again, I want to emphasize this includes working with adults, children, as well as with babies. Okay, I'm going to ask you about the adults in a second. Okay, but so with what we notice is that when the baby has gone through the story, maybe once, maybe twice, maybe a few times, and each time they move through the story, we bring them back to their mom or dad, and they reconnect with it's like each time they reconnect, there's a deeper integration of the place that was difficult for them. Yeah. And so what we notice then is the body language disappears. Okay. It's like they're not touching themselves in the same way. And also what we notice is the behavior that originally the parent came with, we could say the symptom, like my baby's not settling, my baby's crying a lot, that either diminishes or disappears.
Oh, really?
Oh, really? Yeah. And so this then allows the baby and the parent to bond in a whole new way. Because let's imagine this. Let's imagine you're trying to tell me a story. Let's imagine just before this interview you had a very stressful experience and you're trying to tell me.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, Mark, it's okay. It's okay. Shh, it's okay. You'd start to feel pretty irritated after a while.
Well, to say the least, yeah.
To say the least. Let's say as well, I think probably you're hungry, Mark. And so I get a plate of cookies, biscuits, and I start saying, come on,
well,
just eat this instead. No, you're going to feel much better. The relationship here is we're going to be struggling, aren't we?
Absolutely.
And let's say I really believe I'm doing the right thing here.
Yeah.
And I cannot understand, why are you responding to me like this? What am I doing wrong here?
Yeah.
You must really hate me.
Yeah.
The way you're behaving.
Yeah, parents would turn it against themselves.
Exactly. And it's a huge relief when parents get it. They can hear the story, that the difficult behavior settles, they come into a better relationship with each other. And the other thing I like about it is that actually there's real health in the baby trying to tell their story. Yeah. So again, let's use the analogy. You've had a stressful experience. Yeah. You want to tell me about it. You can't really settle with me until you tell me about it. That's very natural. It's a very healthy response. Yeah. If you were just holding it inside, like, I mean, that wouldn't be a healthy response. So it's the same often with the babies crying. It's an incredibly healthy response. Okay. It's just that people don't know how to respond to it a lot of the time. Yeah. And so one of the other things that I see with the parents is that their experience shifts from there's something wrong with my baby to, my God, my baby is so intelligent. This is so cool that my baby can tell the story like this. Yeah. And sometimes with slightly older children, we explore it. We're talking about the birth. We're exploring this together. For example, I'm saying with the mom, so your child moves through the pelvis like this, okay, and this is where they got stuck, and so. So
you demonstrate that to the mother.
I might well be. I'm inquiring, but I'm not so much demonstrating. It's kind of saying, okay, so this is maybe where you felt like your baby got into difficulty, or maybe the baby got that far, and suddenly it was really quick. Is that what you're saying? So we're exploring it together.
Together with the mother, and the child is also present.
The child is present, and then the child comes over, and they take the doll, and they do something like this. Okay. And our mum suddenly goes, "Oh my God!
Yeah,
that's right. The baby came down and went up twice."
So you're saying they're really that specific?
They are that specific, and I know that can sound very odd. I remember when I first started, I used to think, did that really happen?
Yeah.
Could a baby really be that specific? Do they know what we're talking about here? And I've seen it so many times, I just can't deny it anymore. It's so clear, and they are so specific. It's stunning.
Okay.
And they really want to tell their stories. I think this is the important thing. They want to tell their stories. They need to tell their stories. And until they've told their stories, they can't fully arrive. In the same way that if you were sat here and you were still feeling some stress from something that happened earlier, you couldn't really be present with me.
I get it, yeah.
It's relational.
Yeah. So what should parents do when they realize, okay, this may apply to my little kid or to my baby? Mm-hmm. And I wonder if there are many baby therapists around. So what could they do?
Well, it's always difficult, because in a sense there's a greater need than there is the the ability or the number of people to actually meet that need. And it can be so helpful to get the support of a baby therapist. And in that sense, I kind of think we are in the kind of territory maybe that psychotherapy was 100 years ago. You know, a lot of people may have got very interested in the ideas of psychotherapy, but there weren't so many people around. But the main thing we stress with parents that they can do is, if they've tried everything else and nothing is really working, then just see, can I feel what the emotional quality is to the crying? And if I can I just empathize with that and reflect that back? It's like, I can see you are so angry. I'm so sorry that you're so angry. You know, I'm really here for you. And of course, that's very difficult for all of us. Babies cry is very stimulating.
It's very stressful for parents.
It's very stressful. But then to breathe and to connect in with themselves, first of all, it's like, if you're telling me your stressful story and I'm like, oh my God, what is that? We're both cycling in stress. But if I can maybe take some breaths, connecting with myself, be present with you, just hear you, that can make a difference. So I'm not going to pretend it's easy. I would be.
I can imagine.
I would be just not telling the truth. It's difficult to be with the crying baby, and that is why therapy can be really important, to support the parents to hear the baby.
Now, what happens if a baby doesn't get any support in this situation? So what happens if this baby gets older and still, like you're saying, still stuck with a certain experience which hasn't been completed?
Which is, of course, the case for most people.
Okay, and what happens to us?
Well, let's read the newspapers.
Well, can you be a bit more specific?
I can be a bit more specific. So the first thing I want to say is human beings are amazingly resilient. Human beings are amazingly adaptable. But there may be places in our life where we are less adaptable, where we're less resilient. And so this, what I would like to say first of all, it's not all of us, but there may be aspects to who we are which gets stimulated because there is an implicit birth or prenatal memory which is getting activated. And very often then we behave in ways we don't fully understand. It's those moments like, why did I just do that? Or why am I feeling so stressed right now?
You got an example to make it more clear?
Yeah, I've got a great example, and I've got permission to tell the story. It's about myself and my partner leaving the house.
Good.
I know you've heard this story before.
Yeah, I did.
But I think it's a very clear and very good example. So my partner and myself, we have very different styles of leaving in the house. I like to leave very quickly, just, I'm ready, I like to go. She likes to really take her time and hold back, and she kind of disappears. When I say she disappears, she becomes less present, and I become more sympathetically activated. Okay, we've got to get out. Now, we met before we started exploring in depth together this work, and to do the baby work you have to do your own experience. This is something you have to really know. This is not just some theory that you can learn. You have to know it from the inside.
That makes sense.
And what we became aware of is how our birth stories was getting stimulated in leaving the house. So for me, I was a posterior baby, so instead of turning this way like most babies do, I did this other thing. I came this way and I got really stuck here. And nothing would move. And here it was like I thought I was going to die. Now this was getting stimulated totally unconsciously for me every time we came to leave the house and my partner was hanging back. So I would get flooded with stress hormones. I mean, I could kill her. It's like it was because it was like a life and death thing. And I would get crazy about this. Now for her, it was a very different story. Her birth was induced. So this was by an obstetrician who had a golf match to go to. So, she wasn't ready to come, and these drugs were causing really painful long contractions. Her mum was then given painkilling medication, which kind of caused her mum and her to dissociate, and then she was pulled out.
Ouch.
With forceps, which was, as you said, was very painful.
Yeah.
So she was my mother's pelvis that wouldn't open and let me out. I became the obstetrician who was saying, come on, we got to go now. So it's like she resisted me.
Sure.
It was like, you're doing this horrible thing to me, and I was like, well, you're doing this horrible thing to me. So we go, it was like life and death for both of us.
Yeah.
Now, as we did our own embodied work to explore these processes, to release the stress associated with these patterns and become conscious of the patterns that were getting stimulated, this situation became a lot calmer. So it's like we were not flooded with life and death kind of sensations.
Yeah.
We were able to bring compassion to ourselves. It's like I noticed what's getting stimulated for me, and compassion to each other, for each other. So the whole scenario changed, in which even though the pattern's pretty much the same, in that I like to get out sooner than she does, and she does still hang back. She likes to take her time, and this is often, these kind of rhythms are often there in relationships.
Yeah, sure.
But the point is, we're not flooded with all these early stress hormones. We're not thrown into early survival mode, but we're able to be together as adult to adult. And in terms of relationship, this is so important, because it's so often the major stresses that occur in relationship are because we're thrown back into earlier childhood experiences, and a lot of people know about this in terms of like parenting issues, but also to some of these very early formative prenatal and birth experiences. And one of the things I want to say about these experiences is that they are often experienced as life and death for the baby. Yeah. And we say that neurons that fire together wire together. So if there's a particular stressful situation and it feels like life and death, there are a lot of neural connections made in our nervous system about that. And so it's like anything that feels similar, that stimulates that original experience. There's a lot of neural connections there that start firing. We kind of really, our nervous systems light up with all of that experience, and it's like it's happening now.
Which means on a subjective level, I feel it. I got strong feelings for that. So it's strong emotions attached to that. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, right now, imagine if I turned into a tiger.
I love tigers.
Yeah, but this one's a really hungry tiger.
Okay.
And it looks at you and starts to lick its lips and salivate. You probably wouldn't love that tiger so much.
You're right.
So that's often what happens in relationship. It's like one person becomes the tiger for the other. And the very early prenatal experiences and birth experiences can get triggered in there. And the other thing I want to say is, because I don't like it when this idea that everything then gets reduced to birth or prenatal experience, but these inner feeling states, because they're there from the beginning, they get activated throughout childhood as well. And so very often what can happen is, like, when we meet a later stress, the earlier stress gets activated.
Yeah.
And so if that creates a behavior which is not appropriate, I mean, for example, if you perceive me as a tiger and you start going, that's not really appropriate if I'm not a tiger.
Right.
Okay, or let's say a sympathetic response, you feel like I can actually fight this tiger, and you, boom, you hit me. Yeah. It's not really appropriate. And these kind of things happen a lot for children as they're growing up. It's like the earlier stress or unresolved trauma there gets activated. It's an inappropriate behavior.
Like what, for example?
Well, for example, I can think of a child I've been treating recently. This child was born by cesarean. So for cesarean babies, it's like the boundaries are overridden in ways that they don't expect. So if you think about it, the baby, this particular child got very stuck, and so there was a lot of stress already there for the child, for the mom. So then you get this invasion of the child's world through the actual cesarean. The hand comes in, can be quite shocking.
Oh yeah.
Takes the child out. The child's expecting to go this way.
Yeah.
I mean, we know what to expect. In our neurology, after human beings giving birth for thousands and thousands of years, all that information's in there. But this is overridden, and suddenly, instead of being in this enclosed environment, the baby's out in the open and quite shocked. So particularly around transitions, this child gets really activated and can hit out or get incredibly upset. And because he didn't get a chance to power his way through the birth, and babies are very active in the birth process. I really want to say birth is relational.
Yeah. So you were talking about how, for example, a cesarean birth would affect a child when it went to school later on, and you're talking about transitions. What kind of transition would you experience at school, for example?
Well, it might be, for example, you need to move from one classroom to another. It's like, come on, let's go now.
I see.
Or, playtime's over. Come on in now.
Okay. Yeah.
It's like, oh no. Yeah.
So these really small transitions, and not huge ones.
It can be, of course, it can be both. But the transitions then become highly activated. Another example is, let's say it's a very long, stressful birth, and the mom's given medication, and so it's like there's the wiring and firing happens again. So it's like there's the pressure. Yeah. There's all these neuron connections around pressure, and then neuron connections around the effect of the medication. Boom. They wire together. So the child's under pressure at school. A good example is there's an exam, and the child starts to fade out and not really be able to concentrate. Maybe it starts to look out the window. Yeah. Now, those children can be seen as lazy, they can be seen as daydreamers, they can be seen in many different ways. And again, probably all of us have some story here that we don't know about. Yeah. You know, so many times when we work with adults and they explore these early territories, they go, oh my God, now I get why that happens to me. So that brings me to the question I wanted to ask you beforehand. How would you work with adults with those issues? Well, because the experience is prenatal, pre-verbal. Yeah. Just talking about it's not really going to get you very far. Yeah, can imagine. But let's say, to give an example, I'm sitting with you in therapy. Let's say you're the therapist, I'm the client. Yeah. You might suddenly notice I'm talking about a relational problem, and I start to touch myself here. You notice I'm touching myself around my umbilicus, my navel. Yeah. And then you might draw my attention to it. Yeah. And I might start to feel into that as you get me to connect with it, and I start to notice, oh, it feels a bit empty in there, like I don't feel really present. I start to bring my attention to it, and I start to feel something, there's something like really black that feels like it's coming in and flooding me there. And they would actually experience like that? Oh, absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. And we're very careful not to project onto people by saying we think you've got enough. So you don't say, this is a prenatal issue you're dealing with? Not initially. We might come to that in the end. But very often people will actually start to feel like, if we encourage them to stay with the body, it's like I start to feel really small and get very fetal. Their body then might also respond in various different ways, which reflect a way that they survived prenatally. You'd often see, for example, someone hand moving like this, like they're clutching the cord, and I've literally seen, and it really raises a lot of unanswered questions about how the body stores memory. Yeah. I've seen somebody clutching as if they were clutching the cord, and their whole face goes white. Wow. And then they relax and their face starts to
Seriously?
It's absolutely serious. I've seen people 50 years old and more, forceps marks appear on their faces when we begin to really explore what's happening there. So it can happen like that in individual therapy, and then we also run workshops where we begin to explore, for example, creating a cervix. People work in triads, maybe create a cervix to explore the contact with the head. What happens there? What are you feeling? And the body memories that come up are incredibly profound, incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
And when I started this work, I did not realize how powerful this was. I mean, it's been a long education for me to really get involved in this.
That would be my next question. Did you always wanted to become a baby therapist?
I never wanted to become a baby therapist.
So how does a guy like you get to become a baby therapist?
Well, I mean, it is a long story. I mean, I was working at Summerhill School in England, which many people know about it. It's a democratic school. Yeah,
it was very famous even in Germany, at least back in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah. And one of the principles of the school was if you look after the emotions, the intellect looks after itself. Children could be very free to come and express themselves. They didn't have to go to lessons until they felt motivated to. Things were sorted out democratically in meetings. Yeah, another principle was the school needed to fit the child rather than the child fitting the school. So these children, they were big personalities, because they were allowed to be big personalities. And actually, again, I just want to say, against many people's expectations, you could see how the children really wanted structure and rules, and that was sorted out by the community. So
it wasn't just anarchy the whole time, running around.
No, a few moments of that, but not so many. It was, in many ways, it was incredibly well regulated. And we often said at the school, if our government, the British government, could behave as well as the kids in the school council, it would be a much better country we lived in. Yeah. But I worked and lived there as a house parent. I started in my late 20s, and I was very interested in how the children functioned at an emotional and psychological level. I was much more interested in the therapeutic aspects of it than the educational. Through that, I became curious about babies. It's partly because, as I could see already, these children had a lot of experience. And I started reading around that. I think one of the most influential books actually was David Boadella's book. It was called Life Streams in English. And it made a lot of these connections with early experience. Because Boadella trained with Frank Lake, who was a British
and Boadella is a famous body psychotherapist.
He's a body psychotherapist, and he'd worked with this guy Frank Lake in the 60s. He did a lot of the birth stuff. He was a psychiatrist.
Didn't know that.
Yeah, he was exploring these early territories. And so I was starting to make these connections, and A.S. Neal, who founded Summerhill, he wrote a book about babies as well, The Free Child, or at least it referred a lot to babies.
Some of them are even translated into German.
And so there was this kind of implicit interest in babies alongside what was happening in school. So I got very curious about that, and I trained in body psychotherapy and in craniosacral therapy as well. And particularly in the craniosacral therapy, I was working with the babies, but through the body psychotherapy lens, I was seeing all sorts of things and getting curious about that. And the other thing is, at Summerhill, I'd learned to listen to children. And the kind of wisdom of children when they can really be free to speak their minds and taken seriously. And so I was seeing these babies were trying to tell me something, and I understood some aspects of it, but there were still bits I was missing. And then I went to train with an American therapist called Carl Terry, who was then working mainly in Switzerland. So I was traveling over to Switzerland, and I thought, this guy might have something interesting. I already had 2 psychotherapy trainings and a craniosacral therapy training. I thought, I don't want to do anything else. But the first first workshop I did with him, it was like, oh.
And what does he do?
Well, it was very much working with embodied processes around, in this case, it was prenatal experience, and using, again, various exercises to help us to get into the body and then to get into these early experiences, to feel what was going on there. We could say to connecting with the implicit memory. Yeah. And so I thought, whoa, this is just much deeper than I'd expected. But I was very resistant initially. I didn't want to do another training. Anyway, I did end up training and then assisting with him for 10 years. And, you know, it was pretty much my life for 10 years. Yeah. And what I found initially was my work with adults, just the depth was like, boom. It was suddenly, all this stuff was showing itself, which I'd not really seen or not fully understood before. And one thing I want to say about that is part of the reason for that, at least, is that this very early experience is in the cultural shadow.
Of our culture.
Of our culture. Yeah. And so it's like it's a part of the story that is not really getting heard in most therapy rooms.
I see that, yeah.
And so when it's there and someone can hear it, and you can, again, start to explore it by following through sensations, connecting with the body, the story emerges. We start to make those connections then cognitively. We start to get a clear picture. And the story, which has not been allowed into the culture or not been allowed into the individual consciousness, suddenly has an exit route or an avenue of expression, let's say. Yeah. So suddenly I was working much more deeply with the adults. And then I began to train working with the babies with Carlton. And again, a massive, massive world opened up. And so it was, even then it was something I thought I'll just integrate it into everything else. And then what happened was that Carlton he had some health problems, he couldn't come over. And initially I started to take his classes for him, so he was
like a guest trainer or so.
Kind of like that. Yeah. And then people were so happy with that.
Okay.
that I kind of got the confidence then to step in more myself. And so it then took me into teaching this baby therapy training that I teach, which draws from all the different aspects of my experience, the Summerhill experience, the Brauchen psychotherapy, the Craniosacraltherapeut therapy, and this pre and perinatal work that I'd learned from Carlton. Yeah. And again, I didn't expect it to become as popular as it has been. And I think for me that's reflective of the need. It's reflective of the need for this work. So now I train all sorts of different people, like psychotherapists, osteopaths, craniosacral therapists, pediatricians, midwives, psychiatrists, midwives. Yeah. I mean, a whole range of people. Yeah. And that's one of the beautiful things about the work as well. It kind of unites all these disparate traditions, because of course we were all babies, we were all born. Yeah. Yeah. It's the universal experience, and yet it's still in the cultural shadow, as is death as well. Birth and death, they're kind of still quite taboo. Yeah. And do you think this is about to change when you're saying your work or the work with babies has become so popular? I mean, it's still not out in the newspapers, for example. Occasionally it is. Very occasionally. Okay. But, I mean, the thing I find is I cannot meet the demand. And you know, I've been teaching this work for a while now, and we're getting people now to step in a little bit more and take a bit more responsibility.
Yeah, you train everywhere in Europe. You do it here in Germany, in England, Italy, Netherlands,
Holland. Yeah. I mean, and I'm going to be doing it in Hungary, and I've done various workshops in many other countries as well. And the interest is really there. Yeah. And I really want to say this is from well-trained professional people. These are not
just some esoteric hippies.
No, it's not kind of people in flowing gowns. You know, it's these are well-educated professional people. Yeah. And the fantastic thing, which I love, is how excited people get because they may have worked with babies for example, a midwife, 20 years, working with babies, comes along to a workshop, thinks, okay, there's this guy doing this strange stuff, sees a few films of working with the babies and goes, oh my God, how did I not see this before? It's suddenly like seeing something which is so obvious and yet hasn't been seen. And I think it's because of the kind of cultural shadow. It's babies don't have experience. They're objectified.
Yeah.
You know, they're just a bunch of biological reflexes. Well, no, I mean, absolutely not. And the scientific evidence is there, but it kind of hasn't caught up in terms of the way that babies are welcomed into the world, or certainly in terms of the idea that babies might need some therapeutic support. And when we say babies, we really mean, of course, the families. Is that because the baby always the baby is often the reason people come, because they're struggling with the baby. But of course, it's stimulating all sorts of things in the family. Yeah.
So what would you think what would have to change in our culture to make it more, well, baby friendly?
Well, we did a conference recently in Bristol called Human Baby, Human Being, and it's as simple as that. Recognize that a human baby is a human being and functions like you or I. Of course, there are many differences, but in terms of needing to share experience, and that experience to be empathically understood, that is something which we need to understand. And the way I think about this work is now we are just over 100 years since Freud started doing his work in Vienna, and so you had a small group of people. And if you said then, of course, this is going to be in every single city, in 50, 60 years from now, people would have laughed. This is kind of, this kind of weird stuff, and yet it's everywhere now. And I truly believe that this baby work will be the same. It's inevitable in a way.
Okay, so you're quite hopeful in that.
Yeah, I'm very hopeful. It's the way I think about it is the door to the world of the prenate and the newborn has been opened, and it will never close again. It will never close again. It's like the research is there. When I started teaching this work, really teaching this work, it was about 10 years ago, I really started to get the courses out there. There were very few books to support us. And now there's lots of books. Wow. I mean, they're more research-based in terms of understanding the world of the baby rather than therapeutic. We still need those, and I'm working on that. But it's the research is there. Every bit of research over the last 20, 30 years has shown that the babies are more intelligent, more sensitive, more aware than we ever thought they were. And also with the advances in things like ultrasound, I mean, it's opening up this whole world. And actually, just something I'd like to say about that is that we've often found that the research is showing things which were showing up in workshops 20, 30 years ago.
On an experiential level.
On an experiential level, which were counter to the prevailing model at the time. And yet, the research has then appeared which validates the experiential. So there's something happening here. But I also think it's part of something bigger as well. There is a lot of research into the nature of consciousness, into the nature of how neurology functions in terms of the body-mind connection. There's so much research here which is not fully been accepted by mainstream medicine or psychology yet. But it will have to be, because it's mounting. It's more and more. It's coming.
I can see. So this is the mainstream to come.
This is the mainstream to come. It will become part of. It will become part of the understanding, I think, in terms of the culture and the more the professions as well. And in a sense, it has to, because it mirrors our present crisis. That if very early on in life we're cut off from our inner nature, of course we're going to be cut off from the external nature. And I see this also as an ecological issue. It's like if if we're not really able to connect because of being objectified when we were very small, if that disconnects us from ourselves and then from nature around us, we are going to come out of balance. And we're aware of that.
Yeah, it makes
we're
sense.
really aware of that.
Yeah.
And if you think about birth as being a very natural process, and it's like we've interfered with that in many ways. Not that I particularly involve myself in birth. I don't think men should. But I, as somebody who's been born, I feel quite happy to, work with those issues.
Yeah. So, what should people do if they're more interested in your work? Where should they turn to? What could they do?
Well, I guess the best place would be to connect into our website, and then we have links to where we run trainings.
So I think I'm going to link your website to this video, but could you name it?
Yes, so my training organization is called Conscious Embodiment Trainings, and it's conscious
embodiment
conscious-embodiment.co.uk.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So, it's been a pleasure talking to you, Matthew.
You too, as always.
As always. So, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.